Greetings, and you've tuned into Taking Off with the Gary Chicago International Airport. I'm your host for today, James Ward, and today we have an outstanding guest that you need to know. We have in our audience today, or in our studio I should say, Tom Collins Sr. How you doing?
Hi James, thanks. Appreciate the invite.
Glad you can make it. So let's get right into it. Let's start off. Your name, you're a senior, that means you must have a junior, and a little bit about where you came from, about your life, school, parents, brothers, sisters. Go ahead, take it away.
Sure. Well, I'm Tom Collins, and I picked up the senior part due to the fact my son, Tom Collins II, works with me in Luke Oil Company. And so it started to add some confusion on which Tom Collins people were looking for. Mm-hmm. So up until about 10 years ago, I was just Tom Collins. But now I don't mind being Tom Collins Sr. I was born in Gary, Indiana, back in the 50s in 1955. And my entire family was from Gary. My father had 3 other brothers, and my grandfather moved to Gary in the 1920s from Alabama.
Right.
But my roots actually go back to the early 1900s. Mm-hmm. My great-grandfather came from Colorado to help build the U.S. Steel, and he was one of the first city founders, one of the very first councilmen when they formed the city of Gary.
Okay.
So I have a lot of roots that go way back to Gary, back to the origin of the city, actually. So I lived in Gary and Glen Park for a while, and we moved to Maryville, and that's where I went to school and graduated from Maryville High School.
Okay.
And after school, I began my career in the workforce and was subsequently married, and I've been married for 38 years. I have 2 children mm-hmm. and 10 grandchildren. And Northwest Indiana has always been my home. I currently reside in Valparaiso.
Okay. Now, let's get back to it. Now, you say you're the senior. I'm actually the third, so I understand what it means by when they say James, and mm-hmm. when my grandfather was alive, you know, all 3 of us are looking like yes, so I understand that. But let's get into Luke Oil. Understand that you're a part of that as well. Could you tell us your involvement with Luke Oil? Because they're popping up all over the area.
Luke Oil was started by my father-in-law, mm-hmm. Ralph Luke, in 1967. He bought a petroleum company from a gentleman he worked for named Bill Van Zenes back in the 60s. When Mr. Luke got out of the Air Force, came back home, he went to work for Van Zenes Oil, subsequently bought the company, changed the name to Luke Oil, and originally did home heat, sold fuel to some small gas station operators, and sold batteries and tires. Mm-hmm. I had worked for him part-time, off and on over the years, and then I came back to work for him full-time in 1986. And the company continued to grow, and then the proliferation of convenience stores started in the late 1980s. And so we've continued to grow since that time. Besides the convenience stores, we wholesale to many dealers. We have commercial accounts and government accounts that we sell fuel to as well.
So how is it that you've been able to grow the company during this time when gas companies are closing down, and I see Luke Oil just kind of popping up all over the place? Is that something that with your leadership that you've directed?
Well, I'd like to think I'm a part of it, but my growth and my participation and my addition to our growth, a lot of that came in the 1990s. Mm-hmm. And then with my son and my son-in-law coming on board, then in the early 2000s, they brought it up with the next generation and taken it up another step. And we've continued to grow because there's been a lot of consolidation in our industry, and smaller companies have either been taken over by the larger company or has just gone out of business. So we've just been very fortunate. You know, we're in the right place at the right time. Right. We all like to work hard and spend a lot of time in our business. So there's been a lot of hard work, but a lot of luck involved too.
Here's a question I know the audience out here listening and looking. How do you guys determine the gas prices? Because they go up and down, but they seem to change every day. Is there some memo that's sent out every day to the gas companies as to what to charge?
The number one question in this industry when people find out I'm in the petroleum industry. Fuel prices are determined by two things. You see the street price that the consumer sees every day, and that's the one they're most interested in. And then there's our cost, which is posted every day and determined by the major oil companies. And that's an easy question, but the answer is pretty complex on what changes that cost on a day-to-day basis based on supply and the economics of distribution and what's going on a global basis and a federal basis and a state and a local basis. Everything has a factor on that, and it's all supply and demand. That does change every day. We get prices posted and sent to us usually in the afternoon, and that's one determining factor on where the street price goes on a day-to-day basis. The other factor is the competition on the street with the retailers. Okay. And we're one of the very few industries you'll see that post the price of their product every day on a large sign in front of their building. Right. So if you had a gas station down the street from me and you saw my price was at $3.97 and I went to $3.95, then you're going to think that's hurting your business, and you're going to be motivated to change your price in some way, either $3.95 or go below me for retribution. And you know, it's as simple as that, and it's moving and constantly changing all the time.
Now, this is the question I have. This is personal about the gas, and we'll get into some other things. Premium, mid-grade, and regular. Some stations charge 10 cents as you go up, some charge more. Is that some science to that, or is it just based on supply and demand again?
I think it depends a lot on their marketing plan. In the last 2 years, the price spread between premium and unleaded as a cost has risen dramatically. Wow. And I really don't know all the reasons for why. The formulation really hasn't changed a lot, but premium, the cost basis has changed a lot. So you'll see, you know, a couple of years ago, it might be 10 to 20 cents difference. Now it's 40 cents. Right. That's actually a cost factor, but there's still some retailers that haven't followed the retail model and are absorbing a lot of that cost increase themselves. Good. And by the way, aren't we talking about airports and airplanes today?
Well, we just wanted to make sure we got the people out there to find out a little bit more about who you are and the business that you're in, because it's always interesting to find out who are the people working behind the scenes at the airport. Sure. So that's a good segue.
I don't mind. You could get me talking about fuel all day.
Yeah, I could imagine. Yeah. But as you know, you've just been appointed recently to the airport authority, and you were actually appointed by the governor. How did that all come about?
I was the governor's appointee due to some legislative changes in the past year that a lot of people are aware of. The governor was given the authority to appoint the chairman, and an entire new board was appointed as well. Mm-hmm. I was chosen as the governor's appointee. I'm not exactly sure why. I've heard different reasons why. I was acquainted with the governor while he was on the campaign trail. Subsequently, after he was elected at some events, we ran into each other. We share a common background. His father actually was in the petroleum industry, very similar to what we do at Luke Oil. Okay. So we had a common bond there and compared notes. He remembered, you know, working in the oil business with his father. So I think there was some recognition, and that was in the back of his mind when he was looking for somebody from Northwest Indiana. Oh. And I think, you know, he was looking for somebody in business that had been in a leadership role and had also done some development around the region as well. Okay. I don't know if I fit all those qualifications, but I was asked to serve, and I wanted to help out in any way I could, so I agreed and said yes. And not knowing really all the implications or what would be involved, I agreed to see what I could do to help.
Okay. So that was Senate Bill 585, correct?
Correct.
And so now that you are appointed, because the governor appoints the president of the board, correct?
Yes.
So how has that transition been for you now working with the airport authority and those also involved at the airport? How has that experience been for you?
Well, it's been very educational for me. As I mentioned, I took the position not really knowing what was involved. And similar to other board appointments or requests I've had, usually when it's requested, they'll say, well, it doesn't take a lot of time, you know, maybe one meeting a month. Right. But this is, I've been very occupied and busy getting up to speed because there's a lot to learn about the Gary Airport, both its past history and where we're trying to go in the future. But it's been interesting. I've enjoyed the experience, and it's been a challenge, but I'm doing my best every day, and I'm trying to communicate with the other board members as much as possible. We have a great board, a lot of engaged people. They're all interested as well as to where we're going to go with the challenges before us. And so far, it's been a pleasure working with everybody.
Awesome. So now, some of the things that you are involved in is the P3 exploration, the runway expansion, as well as other things that are taking place at the airport. So could you tell me your opinion about the P3 and how that will affect the airport once that's pushed through? I shouldn't say pushed through, but once it manifests itself.
Well, the P3 is a pretty interesting concept. If it can help spur development around the airport and bring new sources of revenue to the airport, that needs to be explored. There's been an ad hoc committee that was established back in April that have been working hard, and they've been working according to the schedule that they laid out, meeting their deadlines, met with potential developers. I haven't been updated recently, but I have some, earlier reports that I've looked over. So I think it needs to be a win-win situation for the airport, for the developer, and for the public as well, that a developer is chosen that's going to help move things forward for the airport and the area of Northwest Indiana as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because one of the things, when I said push through, I laugh because that's a word we stay away from at the airport, because we don't want people to think that we're pushing something down the throat of the community. However, one of the things that has been noted in the newspaper, in the media, is that there's a difference between government speed and business speed. In your assessment, how does that differ, I guess, in your opinion?
That's an easy question to answer and quite apparent to everybody. The speed of business moves much quicker than government, and especially depending on the size of business. So that's an adjustment for me as well, because I'm used to making decisions and executing decisions on a day-to-day basis without delay. With government decisions, more time is involved, more communication is necessary with all the different people that are involved in those decisions. So it's something I'm learning to have patience for.
Right. Now let's move into the runway construction. Now I have some photos I just saw today, and it shows where the extension is pretty much complete, except for the connecting part from the old runway to the new extension. Now there have been some issues that have come up with the environmental and the railroad companies. Could you elaborate a little bit on that and some of the things that are holding us back from connecting those two?
I'll address the railroad first. There's a railroad line that goes through there that was actually replaced. A new railroad spur was built, but it hasn't been utilized yet. The railroad company has not moved over to it because they're waiting to finalize some agreements with some of the other railroads that are involved. And I think we have CN, CSX, and possibly Norfolk Southern. I might get those three confused a little bit.
That's great.
But getting railroads to work together historically has been a slow process.
Yes.
The disadvantage we have at the airport is these agreements that they're trying to make between each other really don't involve the airport, but they benefit us. So we have no leverage in that situation to say, you must make this agreement with one of your competitors in order for us to extend the runway. So railroads move at a slow pace historically regardless of any issue, but when it comes down to the issue of forging a new agreement with a competitor, you can see the challenges there. So we're kind of an outsider in those negotiations. We're making progress. We're continuing to do what we can to move the process forward, but it's a big challenge, but we're optimistic that we'll get some results in the near future. Addressing the environmental concerns, being in the petroleum business and developing petroleum sites, I've learned that you never really know when you're developing a site the full story of the environmental situation until you get below ground and actually see physically what you're dealing with. You can do assessments, but they're just general and broad in scope. So we're finding more environmental conditions that were unknown to us as the more we dig and the more we move on. And the piece of the airport runway that you mentioned that needs to be continued and completed, There's still some environmental issues there that were unknown to us. The area historically, over the years, going way back, being next to the steel mills and petroleum companies, there's a lot of hazardous waste that's been dumped there, even before environmental regulations were the law. But now, if you develop something, you're responsible for bringing it up to today's standards. So that's a big issue for us, to take land that historically was dumped on, chemicals were leaked. There was no regulation back then.
Right.
But now they're telling the developer or the airport, well, we have to bring them up to today's standards. So that's another huge challenge that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Now, do we have any idea how that will affect the end date? I know we've already extended it to September 2014. Do we think that may surpass that, or is it too soon to speculate about that?
I would say it's too soon to speculate, and I try to be optimistic that, given the current completion date, we're still shooting for that date. That's all I can, all I can think of right now is that's my date, September of 2014. If we have to extend that, that's going to be a whole nother issue, and we'll deal with it at that time. But everybody that's involved in the project right now, we're still using September 2014 as our completion date.
Great. And then the media also have questioned whether that will surpass the budget. I know there's contingencies. Is it too soon to speculate that there would be further costs to the airport or the development, or is it pretty much with the contingencies that are put into the budget that should take care of everything? At
the current time, it's fallen in within the contingencies, and our new director, B.R. Lane, has been very involved with AECOM, the contractor, and we're doing everything we can to contain those contingencies and costs to assure that they don't go above it. We can't offer any guarantees because as the project evolves, we still don't know where some of those environmental costs are going to go. But at this point, everybody's trying to do their best to contain all those costs and not let them go over.
Okay. Now, as far as your vision, and maybe since you were appointed by the governor, maybe he has somewhat of a vision for the airport as well. Has the governor spoken with you about anything regarding the airport in the future, or do you have some ideals of where you would like to see the airport go?
I haven't had any one-on-one conversations with the governor as far as his vision for the airport. I think he wanted me to get involved in the process first, find out where we're at, and then you give him some feedback as to where I think it's going to go in the near future and then long-term plan. My own vision for the airport is, first of all, finish the runway expansion in a timely manner and finish it within the budget, and that's my priority. Secondly is to find sustainable sources of revenue for the airport going forward, whether it's through a P3 process or working with developers, finding more users for the airport in the future. It's a great resource. It's a good airport, strategically located, and I think it has a lot of potential for specific users, specific types of users. People that use the airport that are in the aviation industry that I've talked to say it's a great resource and a great airport to utilize.
Yeah, that's a great point to bring up. Out in the public, a lot of times, when they think about an airport, they think about commercial airlines. Is a commercial airline the only way that an airport can be successful, or are there other ways that an airport can sustain itself and provide jobs without having commercial airlines?
Sure, there's many examples around the country of airports that are very successful, that have found their niche in the industry, but they're not commercial passenger airlines. I'm not evaluating Gary yet and saying one way or another whether it should be commercial passenger or not, but due to its existing size and its proximity to Chicago, you have two competitors, O'Hare and Midway, that are very efficient at what they do in passenger airline service. Right. With that proximity, I see such an upside potential for Gary to capitalize on the cargo business and commercial, private charter business and corporate fleets. That seems to be a good niche for them, and there's a lot of interest by those segments of the industry for Gary. So I'm still open on all fronts on what's the best utilization for the airport, but from a business perspective that I bring, I look at who your competition is and how well they're doing you know, how well they're performing a particular segment of the industry. So when you have Midway and O'Hare already dominating in passenger service, why would you try to get into that business? Why not focus on something they're not doing quite as well when there's so much potential for it? So all those things together just, to me, says Gary has a lot of potential in the future.
Yeah, because Bo Kemp was on the show, and he mentioned how our current configuration of our airport runway is longer than Midway's, but because of the berm and the tracks that are there, that limits the amount of runway space that the airplane can use. But once this runway is completed, our runway will be wider than Midway's and longer than Midway and LaGuardia. So one of the things I understand, we have a compact with the Chicago, and there's a Chicago-Gary International Airport Authority. You interact much with them?
They've only had one meeting since my appointment to the board, and it was a brief meeting, and I was not in attendance at that meeting. So I haven't had a lot of interaction. I've talked to their chairman by phone, just an introductory call, and we chatted for a while, but there hasn't been, for me, a lot of interaction yet with the Chicago Compact Board. Okay,
because one of the things that early on, when I first came on board, they discussed the airport being a reliever airport to Chicago, Midway and O'Hare. And one of the things that they mentioned is that they would like to open up, as you mentioned, more gates for commercial passengers. And then that way they would send like the sports teams, like when they come in to play the Sox, the Cubs, they could fly into Gary, possibly even Air Force One, and some other businesses that, because one of the things I've learned is in this aviation business is that the airports can create what they call PFCs, passenger facility charges, and they can charge up to $4. So when they were looking at, well, if we get commercial flights in here, that's 200 or 300 people going through our gates, as opposed to maybe a charter or a sports team or Air Force One where they're not getting as much, then they're able to take those dollars and continue to expand the airport, and they provide 1% of that, of those PFCs to the Gary Airport for our runway. Do you think that Gary would get involved in PFCs if we get commercial airlines, or is that too soon to speculate as well?
I think in the future, Gary will get involved in anything that makes sense and brings in revenue.
Okay.
I don't think it should be labeled as just any type of certain airport. I think it depends on the possibilities and opportunities that are out there, and for us to capitalize on those opportunities. I just, at this point, any opportunity we have to bring in more air traffic, I think should be looked at on every level.
Now that's a good one. Another question to bring up too about air traffic control, just what's happening with the government. They were talking about eliminating some of the air traffic controllers at some of the smaller airports. And I believe October 31st may be the first deadline that they've given some of the airports that maybe we may need to discontinue. Do you know or have any information on the air traffic controllers? And if we don't have that, do you think that will affect our airport growth?
So far, we have not heard any definitive answer, and all communications so far have been preliminary, that it's a possibility that airports within our category might lose their air traffic controllers, but nothing definitive has been relayed at this point. I heard the same deadline as you did, October 31st, and I keep waiting for updates and have not heard anything. I think that previously, you go back a year or two, it was also mentioned that they were going to pull the air traffic controllers, and then Gary had gotten a waiver on that. I think it's important to keep the air traffic controllers as long as we can, because it's an added aspect of the airport that qualifies us. I'm told that without air traffic controllers, most of the flights that come in and out at the present time would be fine. They have the correct equipment on board and on the runway that will guide a plane in, but it's an added benefit. I don't want to use the word luxury, but it's something that just brings you up to another level.
Another set of eyes.
Yes, and so I feel that the air traffic controllers are an important part of the airport at this time.
Well, in closing, while we were talking off camera, you mentioned music as one of your things that you like to do. So what type of music do you play, and what instrument?
Oh.
You know, I had to get that
I shouldn't have mentioned that.
Too late.
I've just always been a music hobbyist. I grew up playing percussion, and I was in school band my whole life. But then in later years, I picked up guitar and enjoyed playing guitar and singing. But it's mostly acoustic, you know, easy listening folk and
Right.
easy rock numbers like Jackson Browne, Eagles, and Gordon Lightfoot, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I just always enjoyed music.
So, in final, a lot of times we have young adults that are here watching. What can you tell them about, with your business background, what are some things they can take up in school or they should focus on if they are interested in business or interested in getting into the oil business? What are some of the things that you can recommend to our kids out there who may be watching?
Well, number one thing they can't learn in school is common sense.
Right.
And hopefully they'll get common sense from their parents, or when they become parents, pass on common sense to their children. As you know, it's just something you can't learn.
Right.
But education is something that's very important to me, and anything I can be involved in helping people with education, and I'm pretty passionate about it. And I would say if you're going to look for a curriculum after high school or in high school, you know, get all your basics down, but if you're looking for a business degree, you know, focus on the area you're interested in. Whether if it's business, then take your, you know, business subjects. If it's liberal arts, you know, focus on that. Or if it's the chemistry or engineering, go ahead and focus on it. But I think it's important to do what you enjoy in life.
Okay.
And if you can make a living out of it, that's even better, you know.
Absolutely.
But I would encourage all the young people, you don't know the benefit and the value of education until you've been past it.
Okay.
You know, it's easier to recognize it looking back than it is when it's in front of you. So yeah, definitely the value of education is something you just can't take away from a person once you have it.
Absolutely. That 20, and you know, hindsight is 20/20 vision. So are you going to be playing publicly anywhere that we can give out some dates so we can come check out?
No.
Well, you've been tuned in to Taking Off with the Gary Chicago International Airport. I'm your host, James Ward, Marketing and Communication Liaison for the airport. And we've been talking with Tom Collins Sr., the Gary Chicago International Airport Authority President. Well, thank you for watching, and keep watching, and we'll be right back.